6 marathons, 6 continents, 6 days. I just heard that and my mind was blown. What if the key to achieving anything in life wasn't about working harder, but living more intentionally?
And no one finished the sentence. Said, and by the way, you're going to end up soulless, lose your sense of humor, have, made yourself into a single-dimensional human who wasn't useful for much other than working. Well, we're sitting on this massive mound of potential, and if we don't do something about it, it just stays there. And so, that potential should be realized, and the way we realize it is by instigating. And the way we instigate is, by setting these goals that we would call sort of, our why or our purpose, building the pillars that allow us to become resilient every day. The autopilot just says that you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. What are you learning? How are you growing? How are you embracing discomfort? So the first part of this is this acknowledgement that this autopilot does not really create a complete person.
Is something standing between you and your happiness? It was for me. I had to face my depression and the constant negative self-talk. Therapy helped me realize I deserve to be happy. That's why this podcast is called I Choose Health, because I made the choice to heal and I want to share that with you. It's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. 60% of you who are watching this podcast are men. And brothers, it is time to take care of yourself. As a gift to you, we've partnered with BetterHelp as our sponsor to help you start your own healing journey. We all face moments when life feels overwhelming, whether it's stress, anxiety, or just feeling stuck. Talking to someone can make a real difference, and that's where our sponsor BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp offers professional online therapy that's convenient, affordable, and entirely on your schedule. You can connect with a licensed therapist by video, phone, or even chat, whatever works best for you. Let our sponsor BetterHelp support you on your journey to better mental health. You can get 10% off your first month by going to betterhelp.com/iChooseHealth. That's betterhelp.com/iChooseHealth for 10% off your first month. Take the first step toward feeling better today. All right, guys, welcome back to the I Choose Health podcast. I'm your host, Stefan Lessie. 6 marathons, 6 continents, 6 days. I just heard that and my mind was blown. I just thought that was crazy. So, guys, what if the key to achieving anything in life wasn't about working harder, but living more intentionally? Today on the I Choose Health podcast, I'm sitting down with Joe Gagnon, who's an endurance athlete, CEO, and author of Living Intentionally. He's a man who ran 6 marathons on 6 continents in 6 days while running a business. But what Joe teaches isn't just about extremes, it's about designing your day, your thoughts, and your goals so that you don't wake up years from now asking, how did I get here? If you've ever felt stuck in autopilot, overwhelmed by distraction, or disconnected from your purpose, this episode will show you how to flip that switch and live by design and not default. Joe Gagnon, welcome to the I Choose Health podcast.
Stefan, thanks for having me. So it's pretty wild to hear the introduction because I'm always like, who's that? I don't realize it's me. But yeah, I think that, we'll get into whatever way you want to, but I always like to just remind people that, where we end up isn't sort of like by magic, right? It's like you gotta go through a path there and we can talk about how we got there.
Yeah. So Joe, you talk about living life on purpose. Going through your book, you mentioned this word purpose 139 times. For someone who feels stuck in autopilot, what's the very first step they can take today to begin living life with intention?
Stefan, I think, let's just say, if we go back in my life, right? I'll like even just chunk it into, forget it as a kid, and all that happens to us then probably is the same happened to you as happened to me, just my version. But when I started working, I thought that the world had defined a path that I should follow. Was, get a job, work hard, find a person, make them your partner, have some kids, buy a car, buy a house, make more money, then try and buy more stuff. And no one finished the sentence. Said, and by the way, you're going to end up soulless, lose your sense of humor, have, made yourself into a single-dimensional human who wasn't useful for much other than working, and that you probably weren't going to feel very satisfied, fulfilled, or happy. And so I think we got to finish that sentence, which is that there's nothing bad about that pathway, but it just cannot be all. And it needs to be connected to something bigger than I'm just saving for my retirement or for some kids to go to college. All fine goals, but they got to connect to something bigger. And so as we go through our life, I think we need to step back a little bit and say, whose life are we living? And what I found when I was in my late 30s was that I was living the life everyone else had designed, but I didn't think that it was providing me ultimately the best path to maximizing my potential. Because the truth of the matter is that we're way more capable than what we do every day. The autopilot just says that you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. What are you learning? How are you growing? How are you embracing discomfort? How are your systems evolving? Even our emotional states can be better and stronger. And we know this, right? That the human system is built to thrive, but it can live in the world of survive. In the world of survive, nothing continues to develop. In the world of thrive, our muscles grow, our brains grow, our neuromuscular system, our nervous system, everything about us gets stronger, better, more resilient, and we can take on more. We can find out what our potential really is about. And so when I finally had the breakthrough, it was a little bit of this, I couldn't run a mile or do a push-up, I didn't have much going for me other than I knew how to work, and I was getting disconnected from even the people who I thought mattered to me, my family, because they were off doing stuff when all I was doing was working. So I'm like, I don't know if that really is it. So the first part of this is this acknowledgement that this autopilot does not really create a complete person. So that's the first step, is acknowledgement. Then from there, we can start working on, okay, well, why am I here? Like, what am I supposed to do? This is what purpose is about. And I don't think there's a purpose that Stefan has or Joe has or anyone else has that's the only one. It just has to be yours. Mine ended up being in service to others. My goal was over time to help people live and grow deeply into their potential, to find out their path to fulfillment, to be able to serve the world by realizing that we live in a world of abundance, and that if we actually leverage the skills and tools and capabilities that we have, that we can all share in that abundance, and that we can, indeed, I don't even know if I know exactly what the word happy means, but what I would say, it feels good. We know it. We don't have to have word. We just know it. And we know it when we start to live with our purpose and deliver on that, because all of our human systems start connecting in the right way. And so that was the starting point. Then it took another 25 years to get to this point where I could write a book about it. But and a heck of a journey, and I've just loved it.
Yeah. What you just said has such an impact on me just now about finishing the sentence. And so it's just interesting, when we live in autopilot, it just feels like there's this closed loop, right? Where we just keep repeating the same things day in, day out. And we're not really learning much, right? We're just getting by, we're surviving. We're just staying in that closed circle. And what I'm hearing from you is that thriving is actually also going outside that circle and going beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. You might have an F1 car in your driveway, but if you don't go out and use it, it doesn't do you much good. You can have a lot of money in your bank account, but if all it does is sit there, we would know that's not very good. Well, we're sitting on this massive mound of potential, and if we don't do something about it, it just stays there. And so, that potential should be realized, and the way we realize it is by instigating. And the way we instigate is by setting these goals that we would call sort of, our why or our purpose, building the pillars that allow us to become resilient and to become vital and to become productive, so 5 simple pillars. These are things that actually build strong people, but there are things like sleep, exercise, nutrition, community, mindset. Like, what do we do about those every day? We have 168 hours in the week. It's our currency. How do we use our time? Are we happy with how we use our time? The community that we're part of, what do we do to learn and to share? And then, what I always like to think about is create another framework called grit, grace, and grounded. These are sort of the practices that acknowledge how life evolves. That, you sometimes need grit because it gets hard. That's okay. And you have to have grace because we can't always be hard on ourselves. We have to sort of accept. And then grounded is to have integrity, to have a base foundation that's actually built to the strength of what a foundation would be, something that doesn't get blown over, that has values connected with it, that has sort of a social and moral ecosystem behind it. And now when you think about all of that together, you can see how that becomes a much more high-performing person.
So in the book, you distinguish between living by default versus design. Can you walk us through how someone can redesign their typical day to align with their bigger goals?
Yeah. So I think that, the first part for me is this sort of acknowledgement of how I use my time. Anyone I coach, I start with a really simple first step, which is we map out a week, 7 days, 24 hours, and let's track what we've done every hour for that week. And at the end, let's categorize it, and then let's step back and say, how do we feel about how we spent our time? Are we happy with our 7 hours of scrolling on TikTok? Are we happy with the fact that, we didn't do any exercise? Are we happy with, and I think if we do this by ourselves, look in the mirror, most times we would say, I think I could do better with how I use my time. So that's first and foremost. You don't need more money. You don't need more stuff. You actually just think about currency and time. That's what you get to spend. And so from there, then we could say, okay, well, how would I build against these 5 pillars? What would I do about them every day? Am I getting the right amount of sleep? Okay, well, that's easy to change. What am I eating? I do the same assessment. We're going to eat somewhere around 88,000 pounds of food throughout our lives. It makes a big difference what you're eating. Ultra-processed foods are not going to help us think better. They're not going to get us healthy. Exercise. Our bodies are made to move. How much are we moving every day? Are we moving 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours? Our mindset. Are we talking negatively, or are we doing some thoughtful meditation or reflection that's helping us think about ourselves? I always think, why wouldn't you want to say positive things about yourself? Why wouldn't you want to have every day be a vacation day? Isn't this all up to us?
Yeah.
And then the last thing is community. We are not meant to be solo artists on the stage. We are meant to be part of. And so that interaction, like us, our neurobiology reacts very well to relationships and community and support and nurturing. And so manage our time better, think about the pillars as these basics of actually improvement, and then write down a plan. Everyone always asks me, what's the one thing you could do tomorrow to change? And I would love everyone to take an hour and focus on yourself. But if you can't take an hour, how about 15 minutes? What can you do 15 minutes that's just about you, right? And then move it to a half hour over time. And before you realize it, once you prioritize yourself, you serve the world better. And because the order needs to be you first, family second, work third. Because you cannot serve the others well if you are not resilient and full of vitality, strength, and dependability. And so those are so you don't, if you heard Stefan, what I said, there's nothing about money. This isn't about privilege. This isn't about other resources. This is literally us. That's where I started. And I didn't know much. Just literally didn't even know, when I started doing triathlons, that you shouldn't wear your underwear under your bike shorts. It was okay. I didn't know how to run around the block. I figured it out. Now today, at YouTube, and we got all this stuff we can learn from. So it's no obstacle. And I keep going in the book, more and more examples, because I believe in this deeply. These two sort of fun concepts. One is that it's never the end, it's always the beginning, all the time. It's always a new beginning. It doesn't matter what just happened. That's history. And the second is, I don't need permission to live a great life. I don't need anyone to let me know, like, this is mine, I'm going to go do it. And if I do that, then all of a sudden everything sort of unlocks. And now, like, oh, wow, I could actually go run in the rain. Wouldn't that be fun? Let's go see what that feels like. And don't wait for something to happen. Make it happen. Invite yourself. Have a party. Go there. Offer your services. Raise your hand. Say yes. Stay away from no. I mean, it's all right there. And every bit of that, as you do it more and more, it starts to build strength and resiliency. And then you can do more. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, I don't know, maybe you're out there running an ultramarathon like me. Because, by the way, that was never the plan. I never thought I'd run a marathon. Marathons, ultramarathons, I'm up to 96 of them. I never thought that I would go in an Ironman because I couldn't swim. I never thought I would do 6 marathons in 6 continents in 6 days. I never thought I'd be a CEO, and I've done that 6 times. None of this was possible, Stefan. None of it. Right? Because that was the identity I had. But I broke free of that identity, and then I started building. And then I had some patience. I'm like, I had courage. I made commitments, and I stuck to them consistently.
Keeping on that theme of consistency, what is also consistent for me is what David Atkins said to me yesterday. And he was saying that when he transitioned into this new life of, being a public speaker, becoming a CEO, when he was about to retire from his position as a state trooper, his mentor was telling him, like, you need to pursue something greater, something else. And he was just thinking, well, I did what I needed to do. Like, I stayed within not necessarily his purpose, but what he thought his life was just meant to be. It was meant to be the state trooper, and that was it. And that individual helped him to see that there was way more than to just being a state trooper, right? And so just realizing that and seeing that connection between the purpose and why, and to there being something bigger for each of us, right? And I think for so many of us, we find a way to pigeonhole ourselves or keep ourselves into one frame of thinking, one frame of being, when there may be so much more for us to do.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts about that. I always tell people you can do more than you think you can. But so if we try to unwind it a little bit and say, like, why does that happen? So if we look back at evolution, right, in the beginning, when we were living in a cave and there were a few of us and we're trying to survive, a lot of those behaviors still continue because they're innate in the human system. And so taking less risk, which is the identity that you start with, is a very protective and somewhat rational thinking. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't optimize on the possibilities and the potential. We no longer live in a world of scarcity. We live in a world of abundance. And in a world of abundance, which is available to all of us, our human system is made to thrive. And so the breakthrough is not to say that anything I did was bad or that identity isn't what I want to be. It's just that we can be so much more than that. And you'll hear very successful people say they feel like imposters. I might offer, and I was written about an article recently, and someone said that I have a hard time calling myself an athlete. Well, that's, because in high school and college I wasn't one, so that was my identity. But, I think I am probably in the top in the world in ultra endurance activities, yet I still sort of think I am just average and normal. And everyone would look at me and say, well, I don't think that's actually could be true. The facts don't tell that story. And so we work, all of us, on moving past the identity we had in the formative stages of our life. But it can't be the end. That's why I said it has to be the beginning. What I realized was that was only then that I could evolve out of that I could dream big, that I could see what this potential was capable of. Like the physical stuff is easy because we can characterize it in numbers. Like I did 2,000 pull-ups in December in 11 hours and 40 minutes. So a lot of people can't do one. And I was able to do 2,000. And so, but that was a long time of dreaming and working and attempting and being curious, what would it be like? But that shows what the potential is from not doing any to be able to do 2,000. I'm not physically more, better than anyone else. I just applied myself. And so this is why I have this, just amazing confidence in anyone listening that if you have the life ahead of you, you can go do anything you want. And it's just actually that, like I wrote about in the book, the courage first to make the commitment to believe, to consistency, which ultimately is mastery. I don't get bored, Stefan. Like I went 5 years in a row and ate peanut butter and jelly for lunch every day. And every day I loved it.
Yeah.
Every day I was excited, like, oh my God, I get to eat peanut butter and jelly today. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Most people, what would they say? Well, I had that yesterday. I can't do that again. Like, oh my God. But that's because I connected it with my performance. Like I had that variable locked. I knew the nutrition I needed. It was making sense for me at every level. And so why wouldn't I fall in love with it? And so it's all about the mindset. And by the way, I didn't have a coach do this. I didn't have anyone guiding me. I sort of intuitively figured it all out over time, which I think should also be so hopeful for people that, I'd love you to read my book and there's about frameworks in there, but if you just start leaning in, you'll start learning and you'll start saying like, oh, wow, I'm glad I'm on this path.
You ran 6 marathons on 6 continents in 6 days while running a business. What mindset shift allowed you to pursue something that extreme? And how can people apply that mindset to their own impossible goals? And also speak about achieving this as a plant-based athlete as well.
Yeah, along the pathway, I did make some big changes that I never thought I could. I stopped drinking alcohol 20 years ago. I became plant-based 20 years ago. And predominant reason at the time was performance. I knew that if I drink, I ran faster. When I was eating differently, I felt better. I didn't have all that inflammation going on in my body. And so I was able then to push hard on it, oh, wow, what if you wanted to work out 20 hours in a week? Could you do that? Well, you got to have low inflammation to be able to do that actually for 52 weeks in a year, right? Which is what I would do. And so first it was like the architecture had to be right. So you have to, if you want to go do something big, you have to think like if you want to build a skyscraper in Manhattan, you better put those footings deep into the bedrock or the minute that wind blows, it's going to fall over. So I started there by building that foundation. The other foundation for me was keeping track of what I was doing. I wrote it down in a spreadsheet. I've kept track of every day for 25 years. I have seen the progression and I know the foundation. So that's like really important before someone says, oh my God, I'm going to go do this big thing, because then what's going to happen? You're going to fall apart. So then the second part of it was, I always had this like crazy curiosity for adventure because I was like, I just want to know what that feels like. And I didn't have the wherewithal to go to Mount Everest and climb it or row a rowboat across the Atlantic, And so I kept on thinking throughout my life, well, what kind of adventures could I sort of create myself? Like back to, you don't need permission. I had heard about some people running multiple marathons in a week, and I'm like, oh, I had been traveling a lot for work, so I was good at flying in the back seat and coach. I was good at running because I was doing that every day. And then I was like, I bet I could do something like this. So it took about a year of planning to figure out logistically how to do it, to get enough money, to raise money for a foundation. I had a whiteboard in my office and I just kept writing on it, and I kept on just committing to myself that I was going to come up with a big idea. And the day I did, it was like this, almost frightened me. Like, you can't do that. Like, who the heck are you? Like, that's, what other people do. And then a couple friends plus my partner, everyone's like, yeah, you should go do that. And so I got a little bit of validation and I was like all in. And then the deep planning started. And so, for anyone wanting to go do something big, I don't think it's like you just decide and then it's done. You got to do the foundation work. You have to keep on testing yourself. You got to keep track of what you're doing. It's good to get some support, so that you can be both. Now, by the way, there were tons of people who thought I was a nut job, who told me it was the worst idea ever, and I was going to fall apart and break my leg and miss my flight. And I kept saying, well, look, I'm going to go find out. So thanks for the advice, but I'm going to go find out. But I think you could apply this methodology to any big idea that you have. The other thing is that, let's go on the happy path and say we're all going to live to 90, we don't know who won't or who will, but let's say you are. What's the rush? If it takes a year, it takes 2 years, it takes 5. When I set out to do Ironman, I gave myself 5 years to be able to do an Ironman race. Some people I got to do it this year. I'm like, what are we rushing for? Let's give ourselves the time and the grace so that we can live into it and it can fit. Now, you might need, to make sure that whoever's in your life understands what you're setting out to do so they can sort of roll their eyes when you get up at 4:30 in the morning to go for a run or go to swim, And so I think in that way, it's not to do this in isolation, to do it within the context of our lives. And, funniest thing was that week when I did it, it was my vacation week. So work didn't really care. Because, I thought it was a vacation. No one else agreed. I'm like, this is the most amazing thing I could ever do in a week. I don't want to sit on the beach. That wouldn't really serve me. And so those are all the choices. It doesn't, there are stories everyone on your podcast knows of these amazing athletes and entertainers, and we're so envious of them and where they are. And then if you get deep into their conversations, they tell you about the work that they did every day, the toiling, the failure, the struggle. They embraced it. But sometimes we only look at LeBron James got $100 million contract. Well, the guy played basketball from every day of his life.
Yep.
And I think if we want to be at that level, that's what we should do. It's not a judgment. I've written my second book, but I'm more proud of the fact that for 4,600 days in a row, I've written a blog. It made me a better writer. I held myself accountable. I didn't worry about whether anyone was reading it or not. I said, I'm going to sit down at this computer and write every day. Well, then you become good at that. Imagine if you started playing piano today, Stefan, for the next 25 years. Do you think you'd be a good piano player? I do. It's a mindset.
Definitely. So, you brought up fear. Let's talk about fear for a second. What intentional strategies do you use to take action in the face of fear? And how can our audience learn to do the same? And I guess what I'm asking is there a way to use intention to turn daunting moments into tools of growth?
Yeah. Well, it's the only way we grow, really. Truth is. But I think you got to sort of play around with it a little bit in the beginning and sort of start to calm the nervous system down, because you realize that it is not fight or flight. This is not high risk or high consequence. Please, anyone, if you really want to start down this path, the next time it's pouring rain, walk outside and stay in the rain with no umbrella, no jacket for a while, and just walk around. What you're going to find out is nothing's going to happen. You're going to be fine. You're going to take off your wet clothes and you're changing into dry clothes and everything's going to be good. And the more we do stuff like that, the more we realize that we've probably over-dramatized or we've been conditioned to stay away. So there's 3 chapters in the book, go big or go home, finding meaning through suffering, and, from failure to fuel, that really characterize embracing discomfort. So the key here is to know that we're signaling a lot of noise around it, and actually the noise is what we're reacting to, not the signal. So, if you went to the gym, anyone, or they're doing yoga and it hurts a little bit first time, well, the muscles are just adapting, and they're going to probably tear a little bit, and then they're going to rebuild, and you're going to get stronger. And that's what failure is. We have sort of over-dramatized these words that are actually growth words. Failure and discomfort and suffering are all the pathway to growth. There is no other way there. It's just the way the human system works. It's fine. So I know that. And now, after all these years, I seek out the discomfort. I learn to live and love in that state. I want to know what it feels like. I want to know how to react. I want to know that I won't overreact to it. But it was a practice. So I don't have fear. Now, there are some things that we would never do. You shouldn't have 10 drinks and get in your car and drive, right? That's not what we're talking about. That's dangerous. That is not the same as being fearful of, oh my gosh, if I do some public speaking, I'm going to mess up. Well, the first time you do it, everyone's a beginner. You want to go from skiing to snowboarding, you're a beginner. You want to go into the gym the first time. You want to go on the treadmill. You want just embrace the first time. Because once you do, the next time isn't the first time anymore. And all you do is become into the growth mode. And one day you're then the expert before you realize that people are asking you, how do I do this? And so take very small steps. Embrace some of the fear and the discomfort. When you start to normalize it and realize nothing really happens, I love the worse the weather, the more I want to go outside. Give me a hurricane, I'm ready for it. Snowstorm, I'm ready for it, because that's where you start to feel so alive. So alive. And once you start feeling that, you can't let it go.
One thing I've noticed about intentional living is reframing a lot of the things that people think, right? Some of the things that we think about. When you spoke about vacation, I've always held a philosophy that during my vacation time, I'm actually going to physically train harder than I do at any other point, right? Because I do see it as a point for me to actually kind of somewhat gain an advantage, or maybe even where I probably felt like I may have missed some things. So I'm like, all right, I need to get back on it. So during my vacation time, I had the time, now I'm going to train even harder. So I think that's another thing about intentional living is reframing what you think, because a lot of us are very conditioned that okay, it's vacation, so you need to just relax, right? And I'm like, no, I think if I want to keep ascending is something that has to continually happen, right?
Yeah.
So for us to say I'm just going to stop cold turkey and just stop doing that, I don't think it's really an effective way to approach things.
Yeah. So much to think about on that. Relax. For me, relaxing is doing something moving. That's what's relaxing for me. That calms my nervous system. Sitting and doing nothing makes me anxious. So I'm a machine meant to move, just like the F1 car is meant to race fast. You have to evolve yourself in that direction. This is probably the most sort of controversial thing that I say, but I believe it deeply. There is no such thing as balance. Balance is about surviving barely. And to actually thrive, you cannot do balance. Integration, I got work-life integration. My life is an integrated life. It all fits together. My 24 hours are my 24 hours. I love all of them. And the more I do in them, the better. And so why wouldn't you fall in love with your work? Why wouldn't you? You should. That's a lot of your time. And so I tend to try and turn it all around. So I'm not running away from anything. I think, look, vacation, going different places, doing different activities, that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I'm on a business trip in a new area and I took my sneakers with me and I go out for a run and explore and I get to hang out with different people and eat in a new place and work there differently, I'm like, oh, that was a vacation day. People are like, huh? I'm like, yeah, because I just enjoyed myself, and I just want to frame it in that way. I think that society has created some words that are antagonistic to growth. You asked about failure. You asked about fear. We talk about, balance and relaxing. And I think that sometimes these words create the opposite effect of what we want to do to live a productive, highly potential life. And then we sort of get to a place where we're later in life and we don't like how we feel. And we're like, oh, I wonder how that happened. Well, it was the choices that we made. And we fell into the trap of living the story that everyone told us. The story, which is that all we're supposed to do is work and sit down and do nothing. The Comfort Crisis, the title of that book, is an indication of what we're fighting against. And I know, people ask me, why do I live this way? And my simple answer is, if you could feel this good, then you should. Because I feel just blessed beyond any imagination. I'm just so glad that I walked away from the big money job to disrupt my life so that it forced me onto a new path, which made me understand what living intentionally is all about so that I could even write a book and try and help other people with it.
So I know that you emphasize rituals over routines. What's one intentional ritual you personally use to stay focused, energized, and connected to your purpose?
My morning ritual is pretty strong. Forget the brush the teeth, whatever you want to do right the minute you wake up. My ritual is to write, to run, and to breathe. Those 3 words are my morning, every morning. And they start me off on the right path. So, forces me to think, put myself in a good place, forces me to move, and it forces me with breathing to reset my nervous system. I do end the day doing push-ups, which is sort of an ironic thing. People are like, doesn't that wake you up? I'm like, no, it relaxes me. And so that's another ritual. And I'm like, oh, I do them, and now like my body says, oh, you can go to sleep. And by the way, Stefan, I fall asleep within 30 to 60 seconds of laying down in the bed. So yeah, I sleep beautifully.
So I want to know as well, what are some warning signs that someone is living unintentionally, even if things on the surface look successful?
Yeah, I think, the coaching that I've done requires a little bit of deep dive sometimes to get to that answer, right? But I think that when one warning sign, I was talking to a friend the other day, he was talking to his brother and said, oh, would you like to, I'm going to go do this ultra marathon. You're a good runner. You want to come? He says, I can't do that. I have to work. And back to the 168 hours, that's truly actually not true, but it's a warning sign that they can't even contemplate anything outside the context of this constraint model that they've built for themselves. Another warning sign is when you get invited somewhere and you won't go. You're like, no, I'm not going to go do that. You didn't even ask anything about it. The warning signs are this reflex no in your life that, why did you say no so fast? Should we just at least listen and consider it? How about maybe something different to eat? No, I don't do that. And so once we're doing that, we're operating out of our sort of primitive brain, the amygdala. We're no longer using our prefrontal cortex and doing anything judgment-wise. And so I think if you ever hear yourself saying that too many times, you should go back behind your own for a little while and say, why am I doing that? Why am I holding on to no so hard? What is it about my identity that's creating this gap from where I am to what could possibly be? Have I even explored what that might be like? And I think that is up to us. But you hear yourself saying no. You do. And if you don't, then ask someone close to you. How often am I saying no? Boy, you're going to be surprised by the answer to that question.
Yeah. And I think it's probably more times than we actually think it is, right?
I think that's true.
So I want to know what type of headspace and presence is necessary for someone to stay in that intentional mode, right? To stay in that headspace like a Kobe Bryant, right? Or a David Goggins or a Joe Gagnon, right? To stay in that intentional mode. What type of headspace and presence is necessary for that to continually be?
Yeah. My answer is always the same thing, which is that, am I the person I want to be? And if I am, then I'm going to stick to it. That is why those guys, they created a new identity for themselves, and so did I. And then I have the integrity that I made this commitment to myself, not to anyone else. So, do you want to let yourself down? How does that feel? That doesn't feel very good. And so, I don't want to let myself down. I don't want to be disappointed in myself. I don't want to think of myself as not having integrity to the commitments that I've made to myself. Forget the world. Forget anyone else. This is you and you looking in the mirror. That is where we start. And when we start to believe in ourselves, and I wrote about this in the book, and I got to this moment where I finally had a breakdown in the end of a race, and I was burst out crying. And I'm like, why in heaven's name am I crying? It's not because my leg hurts. And because I realized finally that I didn't have to prove anything else to the world. I was actually running away from them, and I had to find myself. And I, for the first moment, said, I can love myself. And if we can do that, then it's easy to stick to the plan, because that's who we are. That's what we chose. And we're not living that other life anymore. It's hard to hold on to it when it isn't yours. And look, it's hard to get there. I didn't get there in a minute. It took a long time. It took breaking through the cultural barriers. When I stopped drinking, Stefan, everyone still asks you want to go out for a drink? And I'm like, how about we go for a run? And they're like, are you kidding? And I'm like, well, if you want to go for a drink, good. But you got to be willing to say no to the things that don't align to who you are or what you want to be. It could be your family. When I stopped eating meat and became plant-based, and my mother says, do you want chicken? And I'm like, no, I don't do that. You have to have the strength for the choice you made, which goes back to the purpose and the why. And I had deep why. And then I became that person. And then I'm not letting go of that person. I am open to listening. I am. And I want to continue to be better. But I'm not going to change because the wind blows, or someone says something, or the world wants to go a different way. Because I know deep in my heart that I've created, a stronger, more resilient, more vital and productive person who leans deeply into their potential. And that's what I think we owe to ourselves, to our community, to whatever higher power we might believe in. Because that's what we're here. We're not here just to sort of meander through life. The way the human system works is to optimize. And so then once you find that, then it's not as hard as it might seem otherwise. It becomes very natural.
Now, someone who commits to just one intentional habit from your book, what would you tell them to start with and why?
I would have to say that, it's really hard to pick between, the sleep, the nutrition, and the exercise, but I would pick exercise. I think that will instigate everything else. If you 1 day, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, start with something, that will change all the others. It is because, look, the muscle is the biggest organ in the body, right? It creates all of our energy. When we have high energy, everything else works. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden I better eat better. Oh, I need to sleep. I need a better mindset. I want to show up better. So I think it's movement. This system, our body, who we are, was made to move, exercise. Like, we're not farming anymore. We're not out in the fields. We better do something. So make that integrated into your life, whether it's in your basement, your bedroom, in the gym, around the block. There's nothing in the way. It doesn't take any extra money. Push-ups, sit-ups, chair sits, I don't care. Walk, run, play pickleball. Just figure out what it is and do it. And do it more than once a week, but start with once a week. And try and get it to 5 days a week. You'll start feeling differently. That's the number one. And that will, by the way, affect your longevity better than any possible thing you could do.
And just in keeping in line with the theme of purpose and intention, what does choosing health mean to you?
Well, I think that we have this sort of responsibility as we live to ourselves and the community and our family. And so when we choose health, we're going to show up as a better actor on that stage. If you want to provide for your family, then you need health, If you want to have fun with your friends, you need health. If you want to be supportive in your community through volunteering, you need health. You need your health to be able to do not just the activities of daily living, but to do the more that we're made to be and do. Then we're a role model when we have health. We show people what's possible, and they might learn from that. Because look, we're good at copying. It is literally the foundation. And we put education on top of that. And imagine an educated, healthy person, and what happens, right? We start to create great things. Bring your core value system into the middle of that, and then life gets better. Having, a social contract to each other, leading with respect. It just all comes out of that. Because this body and this mind and this soul and this heart that we are part of is meant to be optimized, and it wants to operate that way, and actually it does push us in that direction. And so it's like, your best performing kid, you want it to grow every year. You don't want it to be declining, compounding interest. It's the same with our health, compounding health. Boy, does that make a difference over time.
Joe Gagnon, man, I am so thankful for you agreeing to come on our platform and just sharing yourself with us, man. Because it's like, speaking to you and speaking to David yesterday, Like there are just a lot of things that are just being reinforced about living a successful life. And so for many of us, we think that we're even scratching the surface, and for many of us, we're not even quite there as yet. So I think just some of the things that you shared today definitely help us to think beyond and just to think outside of that box and go and see what's actually possible and to actually live with intentionality, regardless of what happens to us, regardless of what it is that we're afraid might happen. Just step outside and to do that. So I'm really thankful for you sharing that with us today.
Stefan, I appreciate you having me on the show, and I'm always happy to come back and keep talking with you. And I hope that you and your listeners live an intentional life. You can get the book on Amazon, Living Intentionally by Joe Gagnon, and I'd love for anyone to get a copy. And even it's funny, I put my email address in the book, and people said to me, "Why'd you do that?" I'm like, well, if someone wants to reach out, I'm willing to respond. So there you go. I'm all in.
And guys, that book has been out since August 4th, I believe. So definitely get it. I started reading it, started implementing some of those things there. So it's been really helpful to me. I've shared it with my wife as well. It's an amazing book. Get it, read it. And then also, I know this is the part of the show where we let people know where we can find you in terms of your website, as well as if you are on social media. Some of my guests are not on social media.
Yeah.
If you're on social media as well, they can find you there.
Yeah, the High Performance Life, all one word, on Instagram. And then the highperformancelife.net for my website. And then the last thing is, if anyone uses Substack for content, I write a daily blog that I publish on Substack. It's at Joe Curious, not surprisingly. So every day you'll get a paragraph from me about something positive that you can think about.
Well, guys, go follow him there. Again, go get the book. And again, I am your host, Stefan Lessie. Just reminding you that choosing health is choosing power, purpose, and intention. Go out there with intention. Go and start to make those small changes. Start to make those habitual changes, and you'll start to see where you come into actualization of those goals that you've always wanted to accomplish. So again, I'm your host, Stefan Lessie. And again, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next week. Welcome to week 19 of 52 Choices, where small habits create lasting change. This week's choice is to do yoga once a week. Even 15 minutes counts. You don't need to be a yogi or spend hours in the studio. Research shows that just one short session can lower stress by reducing cortisol and activating your body's rest and digest system. A 2022 review in Frontiers in Psychiatry found that even weekly practice helps reduce anxiety and boost mood. And studies in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine show that brief yoga sessions improve flexibility, balance, and even heart health. So whether it's a quick YouTube flow in your living room, a stretch break in the park, or a common bedtime routine, 15 minutes is enough to reset your body and mind. This week, roll out the mat just once. Your future self will thank you.